What restitution without self for agonies past? So he finally gets what he deserves, and I'm left with what? A half decade revenge satisfied? Will it change the mind of those who still believe it was all my fault? A poetic excerpt from page 78 of To the Survivors by Robert Uttaro. Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and to the review of To the Survivors by Robert Uttaro. This is one of the sexual assault or sexual violence kind of book or literature that I've read in a long while. I think it's a first that I'm reading for this year, really. Though I've been interviewing quite a lot of authors really recently that talks about the themes of sexual violence, both in terms of fictionalized characterization and in terms of real life events really. I mean, I interviewed one yesterday. It was, situation and story. It's quite even very hard and quite unbelievable. And I was like, oh really, that's quite sad, that's quite unbelievable. I never imagined that people can actually go through things of that nature. And sometimes it shocked me, the best or the saddest of thing, or the most unimaginable thing, or the most undescribable thing happens from people that are very close to you. Anyway, so into the survivors, Robert Uttaro has carefully crafted an amazing story, a life-changing story, an educative story, an instructive tale, an anthology of stories that touch directly to the heartstring, an anthology of stories that are quite very real. I mean, these are not fairy tales. These are not made up fiction stories. These are actually real life events. These are things that happens to human beings. These are things that people went through, and it's just so quite unbelievable, really, how things of this nature, even in our current status and world status, is a global crisis, is an issue that needs to be dealt with, one that needs an urgent awareness of, really. So the story started with Robert Uttaro volunteering as a sexual assault counselor at the Healing Place THP. Actually, THP is not the name of the actual organization. I think it's non-profit or so that Robert happens to work with. Just for the sake of confidentiality, he had to use THP, and so will I be addressing the name of the organization as well as THP in my review. So Robert volunteered to work as a sexual violence rape crisis counselor, and one of the reasons I think I'm actually quite interested even in having a conversation with Robert Otaro again, really, because I'm actually interested in having a conversation or having an interview with the author, really, because first of all, I find it quite amazing and quite intriguing why you would love to volunteer because number one, it's a male, and we don't have much of male volunteer in places like this. Why? Because most of the perpetrators of sexual assault, most of the perpetrators of sexual violence are males. Yeah, most of the perpetrators are 100% males. So having a fellow male in a gathering or in an organization that talks or deal with crises that are mostly predominantly perpetrators of male, it's something that's quite uncommon, really. And I think he had some adjustment that he needs to do, because number one, if somebody have come to you to report that I was raped by so person, and it's a male, normally one of the things or one of the indelible marks that these things kind of leave in the act of the victim is the fact that some would tend to paint every male, every man the same way, because yeah, you were raped by somebody, and so yeah, I have to be afraid whenever I see a man coming, or I have to be nervous whenever I'm in a room full of guys, or I have to, and then I think some of the characters even have to live with that mark, really, live with the situation of not having to deal or trust with male, the coming male in their life, just as somebody who has been through breakup and is trying to reconcile, and it's just so hard. You cannot really wrap your head around it. And you feel like, oh, every male or every man are the same thing because they are all rapists. Yeah. So I think Robert, yeah, was like he was just trying to balance the whole thing up initially, working in a community that is full of that's predominantly of female. Most of the counselor are female. Most of the people that volunteer to work with this organization, particularly, are female, are female, are female. So it's quite very impressive, really, to have a male volunteer in this condition, really. And also, one of the things that I love about the book is the way each character, each storyteller, each survivor detail, have a conversation with us and tell their story with absolute truth, with plainness, with extreme directness, without holding anything behind. Some people did add some things behind. Some people were quite uncomfortable with sharing their stories, which is quite very understandable, even according to Robert Uttaro's writing and wording. Why some people are just so happy to share the story, even though it makes them feel somewhat, yeah. Why some are very excited to share the story because to them it could also serve as a mean of healing for them. And all I know, we keep getting amazing stories, stories that are quite unbelievable, stories that you read and you're like, what? Really? That did happen. Initially, when I first flipped through the pages, there are a lot of warning in there. A very eye-sticking warning that the book is graphic. The book is graphic. It is very hard to read. And I was like, oh, save me the time of that. I've read a lot of books in the past. I mean, I've read a lot of books about sexual violence, sexual assault, and I don't know what you're trying to tell me, but let me judge for myself if this is actually graphic or not. So I was like, oh, it's enough, Robert. Just keep quiet already. I need to find out for myself if I find it to be quite graphic or not. But then, as I begin to unfold and open the page, from one part to another, from one page to another, I come to discover that, oh, really? Now I can tell why there was a warning initially in the beginning part of the book. It is just so emotional. It is heart-wrenchingly pulling. It is just so unbelievable. It is just so evocative. It is extremely provocative. It is just so when you look at some scenarios in it, when you look at some action, when you look at some scenes, some storytelling, some part, some characterization from some scenes and acts, you just find it to be quite, it is very dynamic and quite strange to understand how things of this nature are even till today a global crisis. Okay, now I wouldn't love to talk much about the book first of all, but I'm gonna be picking some certain characters whose story are very heart-wrenchingly pulling for me. Yeah, and you need to know really that in the book there is a wide range of now talking about sexual violence and we have different sexuality. Now we have boys that were raped in the book, and we have ladies, we have girls that were raped in the book. And this can actually spot up the conversation that, oh really, so boys do get raped. Absolutely, they do get raped. Ladies or girls are not the only, victim of things of this nature. And that's one of the reasons why you find it to be quite like unbelievable or something that's very extremely graphic, just like the author or just like the uh, prologue section, wants ought to be. Yeah, so I would love to start with the story of Jim, whose story I found to be quite outraging, to be quite outrageous, to be quite unbelievable, to be quite so saddening. I mean, Jim, I think as at the time of him telling his story, he should be in his eighth grade. So while in his eighth grade, one of the priests in the name of Father O'Donnell would come into, Jim's class and invite him out, take him to somewhere, give him cigarette, and that's how they exchange smoke. For crying out loud, who in God's name, you are an elderly person, who in God's team, a reasonable person in God's team, would go and enter a class and invite an eighth grade kid, an eighth grade student, which I think is roughly around 13 years old, to go somewhere and you give him a cigarette and you guys begin to exchange smoke. And that's not the only thing. I think with Jim cases, it's more like sexual violence and him being introduced to something this outrageous, really. I really do feel sorry for Jim. And even the fact that he had to go years later to go and investigate or find out what actually happened to Donnell, he was told by another friend of his that, yeah, he's dead. Let him rest in peace. And I was like, is that what you have to say? You were there when things happen. Okay, now going back to the characterization of Jim, there's a particular day that Jim was invited to, I think, one of the priest residential area, I think, according to the story. And one of the priests had to come out and tell the perpetrator that this boy is not supposed to be here at this time of the night. That he should be in his, I think, dormitory. That he should be in his dormitory, or he should be in where his other mates are. And he wasn't just listening. And the other priest, that's Priest O'Donnell, wasn't going to hear whatever the other priest is saying. And just from the way Jim told the story, you can easily tell that the other priest really felt sorry that he is going into a place that is not supposed to be. And whatever happened, really, something terrible happened in there. Not much detail, but you can easily guess that something terrible happened. And even when he had to come out, from what Jim mentioned, or from his storytelling, because the survivors are the one that actually telling their story in the book, which I think it's more like a very beautiful and lovely element that makes the book to read quite evocatively. Like I think it's more like written in the first person point of view, more like an interview, a conversation where Robert sat down and listened to these survivors telling their own story one after the other. So James said he could feel the emotion of sympathy in the other priest's eyes when he had to leave the room. He said he couldn't really know what happened. All he knew that maybe he passed out something terrible happened really, and later on he was taken to the hospital, and the doctor examined him, and it just, I don't want to go much into detail. It's just quite a lot really in there, and it is really a pulling story. Aside the story of Jim, now talking about the sexual violence that is most predominant in the Catholic churches, the insincerity really, or the hypocrisy in Catholic churches is something really that was expounded. And just like again, it was mentioned that there are amazing priests. Yeah, they are well, good, lovely, amazing priests. But then there are also the terrible ones. So it's not as if we are trying to make Catholic churches look like they are bad, or they are terrible. But we all know it's not this. I mean, this is written in America, and it's even a story that relates in Nigeria and other parts of the world. We all know there are stories that get shocked between, that get shocked down, that you get never get to hear about in details. And there are so many outrageous, despicable things happening in the Catholic society. Let me put it that way. Anyway, from Jim, we're introduced to the story of Dawn and Chris, whose stories are also extremely evocative. I mean, I wouldn't love to go much into detail, yeah, but frankly speaking, but all of the stories are well pulling. Then the story of Sira. Sira's story is so evocative, and I thought so sorry for her. I mean, it is just so sad and so pulling and so evocative. There's sometimes, and this is one of the reasons why I say that sometimes most of the perpetrators are not necessarily strangers. They're not people that you just get to know. They are people that you've trusted for a long while. They could be cousin, they could be family relative. That's one of the reasons why I think parents need to be very careful of the kind of people they invite to their house. I'm having a cousin coming to my house. You should be very careful, be it male or female, wherever, especially when your kids are around and when they're very young, when they're in their teenage years, 13, 12, 9, 8, 7, 6, 11, 12, 13, 14, all of those young age, parents need to be very aware of where their kids are going, where they're being. And another thing again is the fact that what all of the things that everything was mentioned in here, all the survivors, when things of this nature happen to them, they never tell anybody. They keep it to themselves. Because number one, they are afraid. They are shocked. They are trying to understand, get themselves like what has just happened. There's this fear that it lives in their heart. And again, there is this blame. There is this judgment. There is this feeling of low self-esteem that it lives in their heart. There is this feeling of unworthiness that it lives in their heart. So there's this feeling of self-judgment that I think some of them even self-harm themselves, some self-hurt themselves. And we've had victims, not from the story, we've had victims of sexual assault that went ahead to commit suicide because they were like, what is so? It is just more like a very global and terrible crisis. And I can remember of another story of a lady who was taking a walk at a particular time, and she was raped in the process, quite strangely. Yeah. I won't go much into detail. Quite strangely, on and on and on and on, there are a lot of stories in there. And I love the fact that one of the stories were portrayed to poetry. That's the one titled She Refuses Justice. I read an excerpt of it in the introduction, which I would love to read again in here, really. Yeah. You want to give me justice for the pain and the anguish I suffered? Take from me my agonies. Take smoldering cool lump in my soul and plant them deep inside of him so it can never be whole. I mean, it's a whole lot of irony in here. We all know that men are the most perpetrator of things of this nature. And one of the things I think the book tends to preach is to create an awareness. Let people be aware that sex is meant to be a pleasurable and consensual happening between two adults and not one that is going to leave an indelible mark, an indelible pain, an indelible agony in the heartstring of one that it becomes so hard to delete, that it becomes so hard to erase. And on and on and on and on and on. The amazing story in this book. There are terrible characterization. There are terrific story of characters that will leave you pant. Really, something of this nature happened. I mean, I was speaking to somebody yesterday, an author via interview yesterday, and she mentioned that in her book that she wrote, that she was raped by her dad. And her dad did not only stop with sexually assaulting her, he went ahead and assaulted all of his four daughters. Imagine a dad assaulting his four daughters. And one of the ways she had to cope and deal with everything is the fact that she had to break ties completely with her dad. And she wrote a book of it. And all of this, and I told her that I was actually reading a book to the survivors too that talk about sexual violence. And to each person it differs, and it's just so funny, really. How I mean, one of the things that was also talked about in the book, it's victim blaming. It's funny how when things of this nature happen, the victims are the one that are blamed. The ladies are the one that are blamed. Why this? Why were you there? What were you doing in this place? I mean, for instance, if I know I'm going to get raped in a place I'm going to, well, I wouldn't have gone there. Yeah, so rape is an impromptu thing. It is something that just happened all of a sudden, and it's not something that is supposed to happen, really. And that's one of the reasons why I feel the book is more like it's educative, yeah, it's instructive. It tends to advocate against action of this nature. It tends to preach against action of this nature. It's telling everybody, male particularly, men particularly, that you can do better. Yeah, that you can do better. Yeah, it's tending to preach and let people know that these are not supposed to be in place. Now, even the fact that you see somebody or you see a lady that is drunk, and it is not, she's not getting drunk for you to go and assault her or take advantage of that moment. You should know better, like, oh, let's call the police, let's get her help, let's help her get home. Things of that nature. That's much more better than you just taking advantage. I think one of the reason or one of the message I tend to preach is to advocate, to let people know, to raise an awareness of things of this nature. I won't have to give much away because there are deep stories in the book. There are stories that touch directly to heartstring. There are ones that are quite unbelievable. There are ones that are quite shocking. Yeah, very shocking. Like really, that happened. That's quite a lot. So, and I can go on and on. And also, one of the things I want to mention is the fact that aside from victim blaming, there is an injustice system for the perpetrators of sexual violence. Most of them are just like arrested for a day and they are released the next day. There's supposed to be a much better criminal justice system for perpetrators of sexual violence. Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that to survivors also mention on, and it's really a thing. We need to create more awareness. We need to do better as individuals, as people, as a community, as a nation, and as an individual. I also need to mention that the book, it's some part of the stories are unbelievably hilarious. I mean, I can remember reading, I think in Sira's story, after a perpetrator finished raping her, I think he even went ahead to tie her down, tie her hands and leg, and afterward, you're telling me that, oh, I'm sorry for what I just did. Please forgive me. Give me your address. Let me go and drop you off at home. And I was like, what? You want to go and drop the person that you just finished raping in their house? And why Shira said, "Oh no, don't worry, I will leave myself." He still have the gut to say that, "Well, you don't want me to know your house," and I was like, "Oh my goodness, just make me understand, make me believe." Why are people so dumb? And I was like, imagine you raping somebody and you still say you want to go and drop them off in their house. What audacity! What kind of mental? I think people are really going crazy. Yeah, it's a global crisis, and I think one of the things, just like Robert mentioned, there needs to be a proper justice system for these perpetrators. In that way, it will help to curb more people from participating in the art. Yeah, I think there needs to be, because if there are proper justice system of repercussion, of deed, of consequences that follows an action, then there will be a wide range of awareness that, oh, before you get yourself into this, think twice because you may land yourself in jail. Yeah. So I can go on and on and on and on talking about the book. It's an amazing one. It's a lovely novel, and it is one that held me back to my chair. It is one that gives me a shift in perception because I, even myself, sometimes I've been involved in victim blaming. Yeah, I've done that a lot. But now I began to, after reading the book, I began to understand that, oh, yeah, I'm not supposed to victim blame anybody. Yeah. One thing about it is the fact that you won't understand anything about sexual violence or assault if it has not happened to you or happened to somebody close to you. That's when you begin to understand that, oh, yeah, how impactful, how terrible, how mentally draining this can be, the effect it can have on people. It's terrible. So it's more like we're talking about global crisis, or we're talking about bomb blast, or we're talking about shooting, gun shoot everywhere. And if anybody close to you hasn't been shot, and I'm not saying anybody's going to be shot close to you, you wouldn't know, or you wouldn't feel the impact of this widespread of terrible social vices that needs to be attended to quite quickly, that needs to be attended to very quickly. So it's really a lot, really. It gives me a change of perception. It is quite instructive, it is very educative. And I think from the story of the characters, really, you can find that most of them are healing or they've healed. And the stance of them, at the point of them sharing their story every now and then, it gives them much healing, much liberty, much freedom, much satisfaction. They begin to trust themselves and embrace themselves again. It's a powerful story. It's an amazing one. It's a pulling one, and I can go on and on and on talking about it. I love this book wholeheartedly, and I solely recommend to the survivors, to lovers of real life stories, of stories that touch the heart and literature at large. And if you watch this video to this point and you yet to get a copy of this book, I left a link in the description part of this interview where you can get a copy of To the Survivors directly on Amazon. I also left a link to other purchase platforms. And if you watch this video to this point and you yet to click the subscribe button, I wanted to urge you to please click the subscribe button over there. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you can get notified anytime I release new videos. So thank you very much for watching my short video book recommendation of To the Survivors by Robert Uttaro. Thank you very much and see you in my next video. Goodbye.